Number 39, business combinations. You work for an accountancy firm. You have asked to provide advice to clients about the following transactions. Advise whether the proposed treatments of the above two transactions are in accordance with IFRS standards. मांग allocation इन्होंने ऊपर दिया हुआ है वो ठीक है. अभी on 1st of October 14, SAG, a listed company, purchased 90% of ordinary shares in Alu. Alu, which ceased trading 1 week prior to the share purchase, owns a manufacturing facility comprising of land and building as well as related equipment. The fair value of the land and building is similar to the fair value of the equipment. The acquisition of Alu only gained legal approval on the basis that all employees who worked at the facility are retained. There are no other assets, including any inventories or processes, transferred as part of the sale. In accordance with IFRS 10, consolidated financial statements, an investor controls an investee. Um, an investor controls the investee when the investor has significant power over the investee. Investor is exposed to or has rights to variable returns from the investee, and investor has the ability to affect those returns with its operations. According to FRC business combinations, the business is an integrated set of activities or assets that has been put together that can help in generating funds for the investor or generating returns for the investors during a given period of time. In the current scenario, we can see that SAG, a listed company, that SAG, अपनी company SAG purchased 90% of the ordinary shares of Alu. ये लिखेंगे, वो और listed company वाला line अपन हटा देंगे. However, Alu had already ceased trading 1 week prior to the share purchase. This is an indication that the acquisition of Alu was not for its business but rather for the assets that Alu held. Actually, ना ये लाइन से पहले अपन एक और लाइन लिख सकते हैं कि it is important for an entity to know whether actually it is important for, according to the IFRS standard, to know whether the entity has acquired a business or an asset. So therefore, and then फिर वो सब लिखेंगे कि SAG purchase 90%. The manufacturing facility which was owned by Alu, comprising of land and buildings as well as related equipment, had a similar fair value. The fair value of the land is similar to the fair value of the equipment. The fair value uh, of the land, building, and equipment which was owned uh, by Alu had the same fair value, and this is an indication that this is an indication that the concentration test can be met. अभी पहले बात तो concentration test क्या होता है वो अभी इनको बता देंगे कि a concentration test is a test wherein the fair value of all the assets held in the entity can be concentrated into one single identifiable asset or single group of assets, similar group of assets. ऐसा. So thus here in this case the concentration test has been met. However, there is another criteria for determining whether the acquisition is an asset acquisition or a business transaction. ठीक है. This is known as the input, process, and output method. In this scenario, we see whether the entity has the following inputs and processes in place when the acquisition is taking place. The presence of outputs is not necessary. The presence of outputs at the date of acquisition is not necessary. a probability can be allowed, or a probability content can be allowed, कि if basically अगर आउटपुट प्रोबेबल है तो ठीक है ऐसा. However, output should be probable, ऐसा लिख देंगे. अभी here we can see that during the acquisition of Alu, we only gained legal approval on the basis that all employees worked at the facility were retained. Therefore, the input was already therefore the inputs were in place. However, there are no other assets, including any inventories or processes transferred as part of the sale. That means there was no processes in place that can convert these inputs into outputs. अभी इनपुट प्रोसेस और आउटपुट क्या होता है वो अपने को ये सारे लाइन के पहले बताना है कि इनपुट इज अ प्रोसेस. Sorry, input is an element which can be converted into an output if the process is applied. A process is a systematic set of tools और criteria मैं बोलना चाहता हूँ, but systematic set of tools that when applied to inputs has the ability to create outputs, and outputs are created uh, from inputs when processes applied to them. ये literally ऐसा आंसर स्टडी टेक्स्ट में है, तो यही अपने को लिखना है. तो ये इतना बता देंगे. तो मुझे तो ऐसा लग रहा है कि बिजनेस कॉम्बिनेशन नहीं है, क्योंकि इसमें ना प्रोसेसेस है ही नहीं, एंड प्लस वो कॉन्सेंट्रेशन टेस्ट भी फुलफिल हो रही है. सो आई डोंट नो, मुझे ऐसा फील नहीं आ रहा कि ये बिजनेस कॉम्बिनेशन हो सकता है, लेकिन एक बार अपन चेक कर लेते हैं. आई माइट बी रॉन्ग ऑल्सो. IFRS 3 business combinations defines a business as an integrated set of activities and assets that can be managed to provide goods or services, generate investment income such as dividend or interest, or generate other income from ordinary activities. To meet this definition, the acquisition must comprise inputs and processes that significantly contribute to the ability to turn those inputs into outputs. टू क्वालिफाई बिजनेस आउटपुट्स आर नॉट रिक्वायर्ड. जैसा मैंने बोला कि आउटपुट्स उस दिन पे जरूरी नहीं है कि प्रेजेंट होने ही चाहिए. आउटपुट्स कैन बी प्रोबेबल ऑल्सो, ऐसा. ठीक है ना. अभी आगे बढ़ते हैं. The board has introduced an optional concentration test that helps entities to include whether an acquisition is not a business. The concentration test is met if substantially all the fair value of the total assets acquired is concentrated in a single identifiable asset or a group of similar identifiable assets. The optional concentration test is not met because the fair value of the total assets acquired is split between land and buildings and equipment. These are different classes of PPE. मतलब ये दोनों का भले ही फेयर वैल्यू सेम है, लेकिन ये दोनों अगर देखने जाएंगे तो क्लास इन दोनों का अलग है. लाइक लैंड एंड बिल्डिंग्स एंड इक्विपमेंट, टू कंप्लीटली सेट ऑफ थिंग्स, राइट. ऐसा. As SAG must engage in a more detailed assessment of whether आलू constitutes a business or not. ये मैं बस ऐसे स्क्रीनशॉट लिया इस पॉइंट में, मुझे अच्छा लगा इसीलिए. Alu does not currently produce outputs. The acquired processes are therefore only substantive if there is a knowledgeable and experienced workforce able to convert other acquired inputs into outputs. Although such a workforce has been transferred, in the absence of inventories or intellectual property, this workforce is capable of producing outputs. Is incapable. ये देखो देखो. Is incapable of producing outputs. वही मैं सोचूं कि ये capable कैसे है. As such, the purchase of आलू does not constitute a business combination, so proposed treatment is incorrect. मतलब हाँ, अपने को इसको एज अ एसेट एक्विजिशन ही ट्रीट करना है. ठीक है. आगे बढ़ते हैं. On 1st of September 14, Bimbi, a listed company, entered into a business combination with another listed company, Lentil. The business combination has taken place in two stages, which were contingent upon each other. On 1st of September 14, Bimbi acquired 45% of share capital and voting rights of Lentil for cash. On 1st of November 14, Lentil merged with Bimbi, and Bimbi a new A shares issued new A shares to Lentil shareholders for their 55% interest. अच्छा एक मिनट, तो बिम्बी ने सबसे पहली बात तो 45% एक्वायर किया। फिर लेंथी क्या चाहती थी, लेंथी मर्ज विद बिम्बी एंड बिम्बी इशूड न्यू ए शेयर्स टू लेंथिल शेयर होल्डर्स फॉर देयर 55। मतलब अपन ने, अपन जब अपन बिम्बी थे और अपन ने जब लेंथिल को एक्वायर कर लिया या उसका 55% ले लिया, तो उस 55 के लिए हमने उनको कुछ शेयर्स इशू किए। On 1st of on 31st of August 14, Bimbi had a market value of 70 million and Lentil a market value of 90 million. Bimbi's business represents 45% and Lentil's business 55% of the total value of combined business. After the transaction, the former shareholders of Bimbi, excluding those of Lentil, owned 51% and the former shareholders of Lentil owned 49% of the votes of the combined entity. The chief operating officer, the chief operating officer of Lentil is the biggest individual owner of the combined entity with 25% interest. The purchase agreement provides for a board of 6 directors for a combined entity, five of whom will be former board members of Bimbi, will with one set reserved for a former board member of Lentil. The board of directors nominates the members of the management team. Management comprised of COO and four other members, two from Bimbi and two from Lentil. Under the terms of the agreement purchase, COO of Lentil is the CEO of combined entity. Bimbi proposes to identify Lentil as the acquirer and the business combination, but requires advice as to whether this is correct. According to IFRS 10, मतलब सबसे पहले वो वापस एक बार 3 पॉइंट्स बता देंगे कि अकॉर्डिंग टू IFRS 10, एक मिनट यहाँ पे ऊपर अपन ने बताए थे क्या? नहीं ना, ऊपर उन्होंने वो चीज नहीं मेंशन की, डेफिनेशन नहीं, हाँ नहीं की IFRS 10 की। लेकिन कोई बात नहीं, जो भी अपन ने ऊपर वो IFRS 10 के 3 पॉइंट्स बताए थे वो अपन ने वहां पर लिखे, वो ठीक है। उसको यहाँ पर ही कॉपी पेस्ट करेंगे। ठीक है, उसको यहीं पे कॉपी पेस्ट कर देने के बाद बिजनेस कॉम्बिनेशन हैज टेकन अप इन 2 स्टेजेस, तो सी व्हाट हैज हैपेंड इज पूरा लिखने की जरूरत नहीं है। ये लिख देंगे कि ऑन 1st of November 14 लेंथल मर्ज विद बिम्बी and issued new shares to Lentil shareholders for 55%. Uh, an investee, when acquires the investee, there are certain criteria or certain indications which should be looked upon, such as what is the shareholding, that who owns the highest shareholding or the highest voting powers uh, amongst the two. In the current scenario, we can see that after the transaction, the former shareholders of Bimbi, excluding those from Lentil, own 51% of the former shareholders of Lentil, and shareholders of Lentil own 49% of the votes. So, thus we can say that the voting rights are higher towards Bimbi. Thus Bimbi has higher voting rights than what Lentil has. ये अपन एक बता देंगे। The person who owns the biggest individual, who is the biggest individual owner of the company, of the combined entity, is not really required or is not really necessary. That should be taken into consideration. It is what is taken into consideration is uh, whose prior board represents the current board, or whose prior board represents the majority of the current board, and whose prior management team dominates the current management team. इन द करंट सिनेरियो वी कैन सी दैट आउट ऑफ 6 डायरेक्टर्स, 5 जो हैं वो तो इस बंदे के पास ही है, लाइक वो बिम्बी वाले ही है। और जो मेंबर्स हैं, सॉरी जो मैनेजमेंट टीम है, वो तो दो दो में मतलब बटी हुई है, दैट इज ओके। The board of directors, now the board of directors are the only ones who are nominating the members for the management team. The management team comprised of the CEO, the COO, and four other members. Two from Bimbi and two from Lenthal, where an equal share is given between Bimbi and Lenthal. However, the COO of the company is the prior is of Lenthal, is of Lenthal. Under the terms of the agreement, CEO, and that should be taken into consideration. तो देखो वोटिंग राइट्स हमारे पास ज्यादा है. मार्केट शेयर जो है देखो 70% बिम्बी का मार्केट वैल्यू है एंड लेंथर का मार्केट वैल्यू 90 मिलियन है. आई डोंट थिंक रियली दैट इज रिक्वायर्ड बिकॉज what matters is the voting rights and not how much is the market value. ऐसा मुझे लगता है. ठीक है ना. तो ये कुछ पॉइंट्स है. So from the current scenario we can see that Bimbi is the acquirer of Lenthal in accordance with IFRS 3 business combinations. एक बार ना चेक कर लेते हैं फिर भी. Just a second. IFRS 3 business combination requires an acquirer to be identified in all business combinations. The acquirer is a combining entity which will obtain control of another combined entity. IFRS 10 consolidated financial statement says that an investor controls an investee when it is exposed or has rights. तो ये सब उन्होंने बता दिए. Sometimes it is straightforward to assess power by looking at voting rights obtained when the parent acquires more than half of the voting rights of the entity. It normally has power if the relevant activities of the investee are directed by a vote. There is a presumption that an entity achieve control over another by acquiring more than one half of the voting rights unless it can be demonstrated as that such ownership does not constitute control. If the guidance in IFRS 10 does not clearly indicate which of the combining entities is the acquirer, then indicators listed in IFRS 3 should be considered. The acquirer is usually the entity which transfers cash or other assets. In this scenario, as Bimbi is the entity giving up cash amounting corresponding to 45% of the purchase price, this represents a significant share of the total purchase consideration. हाँ एक तो है कि अपन ने पैसा दिया है भाई. एक तो वो पॉइंट है कि वी हैव पेड मनी फॉर इट. तो एंटिटी दैट ट्रांसफर्स कैश एक है. उसके बाद व्हेन देयर इज when there is an exchange for of equity instruments in the business combination, the entity which issues the equity interest is normally the acquirer. In this case, as the majority of the purchase consideration is settled in equity instruments, Bimbi would appear to be the acquirer. तो इन्होंने ना सबसे पहले तो वो दो बेसिक पॉइंट्स बता दिए. अपन ने जो वोटिंग वोटिंग बताया ना वो भी नीचे कवर्ड होंगे, लेकिन उसके पहले इन्होंने ये तो बेसिक पॉइंट बता दिया कि जो कंपनी पैसा दे रही है और जो कंपनी अपने खुद के इक्विटी इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स दे रही है, दैट इज द एक्वायरर. ऐसा acquirer is usually the combining entities whose shareholders retain or achieve the largest portion of the voting rights. The acquirer is usually the combining entities whose shareholders retain and achieve the largest portion of the voting rights in the combined entity. The shareholders of Bimbi, the smaller of the two combining entities, appear to have obtained control since their share amounts to 51% of the voting rights after the transaction. The control, a controlling ownership, however, does not necessarily mean that the entity has the power to govern the combining entity's financial and operating policies so as to obtain benefits from the activities. Additionally, the acquirer could be deemed to be the entity whose owners have the ability to appoint or remove a majority of the members of the governing body of the combined entity. 5 out of 6 members of the board here are former board members of Bimbi, which again suggests that Bimbi is the acquirer. तो वैसे ऐसा कि हुआ कि मेजॉरिटी ऑफ द बोर्ड मेंबर जिसके पास है वो. एडिशनली एक्वायरर would be deemed to be the entity whose former management dominates the management from the combined entity. However, the management team consists of CEO plus 2 former employees of Lenthal as compared to 2 other employees of Bimbi. तो यहाँ पर Lenthal जीतता है ये वाला bet. Therefore, the former management of Lenthal has a greater representation. Although the board nominates the management team, the COO will have significant influence through his share of ownership and a selection of the team. IFRS 3 also says that the acquirer is often the larger entity, as the fair value of lentil is $90 million is significantly greater than $70 million. This would point towards lentil as the acquirer. ओके, तो ये फेयर वैल्यू ऑफ दैट मार्केट भी है, कंसिडर किया जाता है। ये देखो, IFRS 3 also say that the acquirer is often the larger entity, as the fair value of the lender is 90 million is significantly greater than BIMBI. This would point lender as the acquirer. Arguments supporting BIMBI or lentil are acquirer are finely balanced, and therefore it is difficult to identify an acquirer. In this case, it can be argued that BIMBI can be identified. अच्छा नहीं, इन्होंने बोला है कि BIMBI ही acquirer है। हाँ, भले ही मार्केट वैल्यू इनका भी ज्यादा है, लेकिन ये लोग बोल रहे हैं कि इट इज वेरी क्लोज, दीज आर वेरी क्लोज आर्ग्यूमेंट्स। तो द बेस्ट वी कैन एस्टिमेट इज दैट BIMBI is the acquirer. This is because BIMBI issued its equity interest. BIMBI is the entity transferring the cash or other assets, and BIMBI has the marginal controlling interest, which is 51%. ऐसा इन्होंने बोला हुआ। ठीक है, नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन पे जाते हैं। Discuss and compare the impact on the consolidated financial statements of Bolo for the year ended 31st of December 14 of if the investment in Kata is accounted for as a subsidiary or an associate. On 1st of January 414, Bolo purchased 45% of ordinary shares of Kata. Consideration was paid 3 million. Carrying amount of the net assets of Kata at the date were 2.4 million and approximated their fair values. The statement of financial position Kata is non दिया हुआ है, ठीक है। उसके बाद the directors of Bolo are unsure whether to treat Kata as an associate or a subsidiary. In the consolidated financial statement, when relevant, Bolo measures non-controlling interest using the proportion of net assets method. So, how to account for it? So, this can compare the impact on the consolidated financial statements of Bolo. ठीक है, सो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, एक मिनट ना, बोलो ने काटा को परचेज किया, हाँ ठीक है ठीक है ठीक है। सो सबसे पहली बात तो अकॉर्डिंग टू IFRS 10 consolidated financial statements, when an entity owns more than 50% of shareholding in another entity, then it is treated as a subsidiary. When an entity owns when an entity owns 20% to 50% of the other entity, then it is treated as an associate. And when an entity owns less than 20% of the entity, then it is treated as a normal investment. Thus, in the first case, IFRS 10 consolidated financial statements is applied as an accounting standard. In the second place, it is IAS 28 investment in associates and joint ventures. And in the third case, it is IFRS 9 financial instruments. Thus, by looking at just the numbers, we can say that Bolo purchased 45% of the ordinary shares of Kata. Thus, Kata should be treated as an associate. However, treatment of acquisition in the company is more than just the percentage of shareholding. If Bolo is able uh, to have indirect say or control over other entities that control Kata, or is able to divert decisions of other entities that own the 55% of share in Kata, then Kata can also be treated as a subsidiary. और इफ बोलो हैज सो एक काम करते हैं, अभी ऐसे आ जाते हैं। सो इन्वेस्टमेंट इन काटा कैन बी अकाउंटेड फॉर एज अ सब्सिडरी इन अकॉर्डेंस विद IFRS 10। और फिर ऊपर जो हमने वो 3 पॉइंट्स ये लिखे थे ना, वो अपन फिर से एक बार यहाँ पर कॉपी पेस्ट करेंगे। नेक्स्ट अपन ये बता सकते हैं कि if the board of directors of Kata comprise of majority of shareholders of Bolo, and the decisions and Bolo has significant control over Kata's decisions and all. Thus, Kata can be treated as a subsidiary. If Kata is treated as a subsidiary, then the entire statement of financial position of Kata gets included in the statement of position of Bolo. The profit and loss statement of Kata gets added up on proportionate basis. That is, if Bolo would have purchased Kata for only 6 months, then 6 months proportionate of Kata can would only be included in the consolidated statement of profit or loss. However, in this case, we can see for the year end 31st of December 14, 1st of January, matlab for the year end of 31st of December 14, we had acquired Kata on 1st of January 14. Thus, we can say that Kata was our subsidiary for the entire year, if a subsidiary for the entire year, and thus the entire P&L will be added up. अभी इट कैन बी ट्रीटेड एज एन एसोसिएट, तो मैंने बोला हुआ पहले भी कि IAS 28 के हिसाब से अकाउंटिंग होगी. If Kata is treated as an associate, then no addition to the statement of financial position takes place. That is, on a line by line basis, addition will not take place of any of the assets of Kata. Only one single line item will be drawn, that is equity method of accounting will be used, in which a single line item is drawn by stating investment in associate. This investment in associate includes the initial investment, which is 3 million, plus the profits that have been incurred by Tata in the entire year. शेयर इन प्रॉफिट्स, द शेयर इन प्रॉफिट्स इन कटा. अच्छा, मुझे ये इस बोलने पे याद आया कि मैंने है ना सब्सिडरी के टाइम पे गुडविल का कैलकुलेशन नहीं बताया. तो व्हेन सब्सिडरी इज अकाउंटेड फॉर इन अकॉर्डिंग IFRS 10, तो मैंने क्या करूंगा, गैप नीचे डालूंगा, स्पेस पे स्पेस लगा के एक और ये लिखना स्टार्ट करूंगा. फॉर द गुडविल कैलकुलेशन व्हाट वी डू इज we take in consideration paid minus or then reduce the net assets of Kata from that amount and add the NCI share. So अपन क्या करते हैं, अभी 2.4 मिलियन नेट एसेट्स है ना टाटा के, और इन्होंने बोला कि प्रोपोर्शनेट नेट एसेट्स मेथड पे होता है. तो अभी अपना NCI जो है वो है 55%, तो 2.4 इंटू 0.55, तो वो होता है 1.32. सो 1.32 इज द NCI प्लस 3 मिलियन का अपना कंसिडरेशन माइनस 2.4, सो द गुडविल अकाउंट्स फॉर 1.92. ठीक है, नाउ दिस 1.92 का गुडविल अकाउंटेड फॉर. ठीक है ना. उसके बाद अब क्या करेंगे. तो ये भी हो गया. IAS 28 के हिसाब से सब्सिडी और एसोसिएट का भी मैंने बता दिया. हम्म. फिर मैंने वो बताया क्या कि सिंगल लाइन आइटम भी बता दिया ना मैंने फाइनेंशियल पोजीशन में. इन प्रॉफिट एंड लॉस ओनली द शेयर इन प्रॉफिट ऑफ एसोसिएट्स गेट्स एडेड एज अ सिंगल लाइन आइटम, ये बता देंगे. हाउएवर, तो फिर लास्ट में जब अपने को कंक्लूड करना है तो अपन ये बता देंगे कि विच एवर वे इज चोजन IFRS. नहीं, ऐसा नहीं कंक्लूड नहीं करते, सब्सिडरी और एसोसिएट बोल के छोड़ देते हैं, इतना ही रखते हैं. आ जाओ, देखो काटा. देखो 1.92 का गुडविल उनको भी मिल गया. Assets and liabilities and income and expenses of Kata would be consolidated in full. Goodwill is 1.92. Group would recognize its share of Kata's post-acquisition retained earnings, which amounts to 2.27. इन्होंने post acquisition retained earning कैसे किया इन्होंने, 1.4 माइनस किया हुआ है. 2.4 के नेट एसेट्स पहले से थे. फिर पहले से थे, उन्होंने वहां से 1 मिलियन को हटाया। सो दिस इज द डिस्पोजल थिंग, ये देखो जो इन्होंने क्या किया बताया, क्या रिटेन्ड अर्निंग्स और शेयर कैपिटल यहाँ पर तीन है ना, बट दे हैव डन, इसको उन्होंने उस तीन को कंसिडर किया, बिकॉज रिपोर्टिंग ना। सो बेसिकली जो अपन एफ आर के टाइम पे वो तीन कॉलम बनाते थे ना, उन्होंने उस चीज को भी यहाँ पर एक्सप्लेन किया हुआ है कि नेट एसेट्स एट एक्विजिशन थे 2.4 मिलियन के, और नेट एसेट्स एट रिपोर्टिंग डे थे 1 + 2 3 के। तो अभी अपना जो पोस्ट एक्विजिशन प्रॉफिट्स है वो है 0.6। तो अभी अगर आप देखो पोस्ट एक्विजिशन रिजल्ट 0.6 आए हैं, तो दिस 0.6 इंटू 0.45 गिव्स अस 0.27। तो ये वो है, वो 0.27 पोस्ट एक्विजिशन प्रॉफिट्स जिनकी ये बात कर रहे हैं। The group would recognize a non-controlling interest in respect of 1.65 million। तो ये आई थिंक अपन ने कैलकुलेट किया था, राइट? अपने क्या करते 1.32 आया था अब अपने को। एंड देन बेसिकली जो एनसीआई रहता है ना, उसमें ये पोस्ट एक्विजिशन प्रॉफिट्स का पार्ट एडअप हो जाता है। तो जो अपना पोस्ट एक्विजिशन रिजर्व्स का प्रॉफिट है वो है 0.6 का, उसमें का 0.55 है एनसीआई। तो 0.6 इंटू 0.55 विच गिव्स अस 0.33, 0.33 प्लस 1.32 गिव्स अस 1.65 का एनसीआई। फिर उन्होंने एसोसिएट का वैसे ही बताया हुआ है कि एसोसिएट के लिए कैसे किया है। फिर उन्होंने एसोसिएट्स का मतलब प्रॉफिट कैलकुलेशन भी किया हुआ है, कैरिंग अमाउंट कैलकुलेशन भी किया हुआ है, बस इतना ही इन्होंने किया। देखो जैसे प्रॉफिट्स अभी इन्होंने पोस्ट एक्विजिशन प्रॉफिट्स लिए हुए हैं, if I'm not wrong, एक मिनट ना। हाँ, इन्होंने पोस्ट एक्विजिशन प्रॉफिट्स को ही नॉर्मल प्रॉफिट्स की तरह ट्रीट किया हुआ है, सो वैसे ही। एंड दैट्स इट आई गेस। और क्या है इन्होंने यहाँ पे, देखो एसेट्स, फिर इन्होंने एक एक करके एक्सप्लेन किया हुआ है कि कंसोलिडेटिंग काटा वुड लीड टू हायर नॉन करंट एसेट पोजीशन इफ इक्विटी अकाउंटिंग वाज यूज्ड, पीपीई ऑफ 14 मिलियन, गुडविल ऑफ 1.92, इन्वेस्टमेंट एसोसिएट्स ऑफ 3.27। This will make the group look more asset rich, which may help it to raise finance in the future. However, consolidating Tata's large PPE balance may have a detrimental impact on the group's non-current asset turnover, thus making the group look less efficient in generating profits. Liabilities: consolidating the loans of Tata may have a negative impact on the gearing ratio. तो इन्हें हर एक चीज को बस यहाँ पे एक्सप्लेन किया हुआ है। नहीं देखो पीएनएल, यहाँ पर पीएनएल के टाइम पे अपन ने बिल्कुल सही से बात की थी कि कंसोलिडेटिंग द इनकम एंड एक्सपेंस ऑफ काटा लाइन बाय लाइन विल इम्पैक्ट की प्रॉफिट लॉस फिगर्स सच एज रेवेन्यू, ग्रॉस प्रॉफिट एंड प्रॉफिट ऑफ फ्रॉम operations। Increased revenues will make the group's asset may share look more impressive. Kata is profitable, so consolidating in its results will improve the group's profit from operations. This may have a positive impact on the investor perception if Kata has was accounted for using equity method। तो इन्होंने क्या किया है, पीएनएल लिया, पीएनएल के अंदर उन्होंने बस बस वो स्प्लिट बता दिया कि सब्सिडरी का कैसे करेंगे, एसोसिएट का कैसे करेंगे। देन लायबिलिटी में भी फिर से उन्होंने वो स्प्लिट बता दिया कि ऐसे करेंगे तो ऐसे करेंगे। एसेट्स के लिए भी सेम। So Tata was accounted for using equity method. The group would simply show its share of profits in a single line below the profit from operations. This would therefore have no impact on group's operating profit। फिर उन्होंने इसका खाली कैलकुलेशन दिया हुआ है, दैट्स ओके। जो भी मैंने बोला ना उस चीज का बस यहाँ पे कैलकुलेशन दिया हुआ है, 3 + 0.27 3.27। देन यहाँ पर 1.92 का वो गुडविल आ गया इनको। तो ये लोग खाली एक स्टेप आगे गए हैं, इन्होंने यहाँ पर वो नेट एसेट्स के थ्रू एनसीए का भी उन्होंने कैरिंग अमाउंट निकाला, विच इज क्वाइट नाइस, विच इज क्वाइट इम्प्रेसिव। ठीक है, सो थैंक्स मच फॉर वॉचिंग, बाय।